Hey guys, Chef Ben from St. Burch. Today I'm going to be preparing one of my all-time favorite tacos. It's an al pastor taco using a bone-in pork porterhouse that you're going to get in your Burch box if you signed up for the meat or the combo. And so yeah, it's one of my favorite all-time tacos. It's a go-to. Some really simple ingredients that I wanted to show off. You can get these at any Mexican tienda. Honestly, you can get them at Hy-Vee too, often, or a lot of stores have them these days. Chili de arbol. These are spicy, small, thin red chilies. I have guajillo chilies. A lot of people say guajillo, but it's guajillo. A little bit thinner skinned, dark red chilies. A little bit hot, and then these are ancho chilies, which are a little bit sweeter, a little more kind of like raisiny, really delicious. And one other interesting ingredient that, if you can find it, it's really kind of an amazing product. It's called canela, Mexican cinnamon. It's similar to regular cinnamon. It's actually a different tree altogether. It's the bark of it, and it's got it's just a lot flakier. It's real mild. It's really amazing. So if you can seek that out, definitely I would suggest it. And then lastly, as a bonus, I'm going to show you, if you are so inclined, how to make some homemade tortillas. If you don't have fresh masa, you can use maseca or masa harina and make some really fantastic homemade tortillas. And they're shockingly simple if you're willing to take the time. So by all means, substitute store-bought corn tortillas, but if you want to give this a chance, I'll show you how I do them. So, all right, here we go. So the first thing we're gonna do is make what's called an equilibrium brine for our pork porterhouse. Some of you are probably familiar with brining. What brining is, if you're not familiar, is it's basically soaking a piece of meat, well, really anything, but soaking, in this case, this pork porterhouse in a concentrated salt solution. That does a couple things for us. For one, it adds salinity to the pork, so it starts to season it a little bit. The other property that it takes advantage of is the fact that when the salt is brought into the meat, it brings along with it a little bit of moisture, a little bit of water. So it actually starts to retain more liquid, which ultimately means that when you cook it, it's harder to dry out. So the old school method is take a really salty solution, drop your meat into it, and then hope that you can just time it where like you pull it out when it's exactly the right seasoning. The idea of equilibrium brine takes that one step further. So some of you might remember from biology the idea that equilibrium is a desired state for any cell, right? So like things in nature want to reach equal on both sides. So in this case, you'll have salt and water, and then you'll have a piece of meat that has less salt than the water. So through osmosis, that is like something passing through the layer of a cell, it's going to try to get the same amount of salt from the water as is in the pork. So it's equal. So what we can basically do is take advantage of that fact, and we can determine exactly how much salt we want in this pork. A good rule of thumb is somewhere between 1 to 2% by weight salt. Okay, so if this weighs 100 grams, we would want 2 grams, 1 to 2 grams of salt for this to be seasoned. Much more than 2, it'll actually start to cure the meat, which we're not looking for. Much less, it'll basically be imperceptible to the palate. So by knowing how much this weighs, and in this case, this weighs 280 grams, and knowing how much water we have, in this case, it's also 280 grams, the combined total of that, so 560 grams, we want that equal weight in salt. 1.5% salt is what I'm doing in this case. So that's, what is that? 8.4 grams of salt. Additionally, I'm adding a little bit of sugar, 0.5% by weight. And I have all this in the recipe that was included with your Burch box, so don't get too worried about it. But the idea is we know how much water, we know how much meat, we can calculate the amount of salt we need. And so that when we put this in all together, there's literally no way you can over-season your meat. You can put it in the brine, you can forget about it for 2 days. It will never be over-brined, because once it reaches equilibrium, the process stops. And so we have exactly how much salt we have. All right, so that said, we have our meat. We have salt and sugar at 1.5% salt by weight and 0.5% sugar by weight. I'm gonna add that into my water and just stir it nicely. You basically want it to dissolve. If you're brining it for a long time, in this case, I would suggest brining it for a minimum of probably 4 hours up to overnight. No big deal. Like I said, you can't over brine it. The rest of that salt, any remaining salt, will dissolve overnight. So, and that's as simple as that. You just pour your brine over your meat, and then let it sit. And then that's just going to make sure that you have a really nice, nicely seasoned piece of meat. All right, now that we have our pork brined, we're gonna make the adobo, which is the marinade. It's the chili marinade that goes over the top of it, that we basically smother it in. So the first thing we do is, in a dry pan, this is just a dry cast iron pan, I'm gonna toast 4 guajillos and 4 ancho chilies. And that's as simple as just putting these in over medium-high heat and letting them start to literally start to toast. They're gonna get a little bit lighter, or well, darker in color. They're gonna kind of start to puff up a little bit. They're gonna get really aromatic, and that's what we're going for. Once we've sufficiently toasted these, I have a pot of water that I'm bringing up to a simmer. We're gonna rehydrate them, because in their current state, they're too dry. We can't do anything with them. At least we can't make a sauce out of them. So I can already smell them, and you might not be able to see from where you're at home, but they are starting to take on a little bit of color here. Oh, they smell amazing. So they're toasting. We're gonna rehydrate them for 25 minutes or so. We're gonna seed them, pull off the stems, pull off the seeds as much as we need to. The seeds are where a lot of that heat is, so it's good that we get a little bit of the seeds out. And then we're gonna make a puree out of these chilies, and then a combination of canela, or the Mexican cinnamon, Mexican oregano, clove, black pepper, and cumin seed. So while that's going, I've got another pan over here that's hot, and I'm just gonna kind of briefly toast these aromatics. Same idea, just get them in, move them around. They're really gonna kind of like wake up. You can smell it. It's just, again, I always say, use your senses. If it smells too hot, if it smells like it's burning, it is. Just don't go by a time on a recipe. Go by your senses. Oh, it smells great. And I'm calling that done already. Once you really start to smell the essential oils of like the cumin seed and the black pepper, and obviously the oregano is very, very aromatic, you're good to go. So pull it out. And then additionally, I think that these are starting to get there. So I'm gonna go ahead and just drop them in this almost simmering water. They can all go together. I'm gonna set a timer for 25 minutes, and I'm just gonna let these rehydrate. In the meantime, I'm gonna show you how to make the salsa rojo. So we're gonna move on to the salsa rojo, but I did wanna mention before I forgot that for the adobo, I also wanna roast some garlic in the husk. Similar to how roasted garlic really adds like amazing nuance to like an Italian dish or a French dish. Roasted garlic this way, it lends like a depth of flavor that we're really looking for. Kind of that charry, like deep, rich flavor that you can't really get when you're roasting it in olive oil, right? You get a lot of sweetness out of that. You get a lot of depth out of this. So I'm gonna roast it till it's soft in the center. And I'm gonna let the husk protect it, but I'm gonna let it get kind of blackened on all sides. In the meantime, I'm going to do the same thing I did with the other chilies, with the arbol chilies. I got 12 of them. These are definitely a little bit smaller, a little bit thinner skinned. They go fast, so move them in, move them out, and then I'm gonna add this into my blender. I have 2 whole tomatoes, 2 cloves of garlic, a half of a white onion. I'm gonna take the stems off of these guys, blend them all up together into a puree. And then we're actually gonna take that and kind of fry it in a little bit of oil and cook it down and reduce that flavor. So I'll show you that whole process. In the meantime, I'm gonna get these out of the pan. So again, these are my ingredients for the salsa rojo, basically just red salsa. This is a simmered salsa. It's raw garlic, 2 cloves of raw garlic, 1/2 of a raw white onion, the toasted and destemmed arbol chilies, 2 tomatoes. And I'm just gonna process this till it's entirely smooth. And then we're gonna fry it up in a little bit of oil. So this is the part of the process where we actually start to kind of fry and then simmer this salsa. This technique is actually, it's really important to the making of a lot of different sauces, salsas, moles, all that in Mexico. And what it does is it not only concentrates the flavor, but it adds a depth of flavor. A lot of times they use rendered lard, like in moles in Oaxaca. But even if it's just canola oil, which I'm going to use here, just the process of frying really starts to concentrate those flavors and add some depth. So again, kind of a medium-high heat. I'm going to add a couple tablespoons of oil. My pan's already kind of hot, so it's already kind of starting to shimmer a little bit, but I'm going to let it go just till I start to see wisps of smoke. So when I see that smoke, that tells me that it's reached that smoking point, which is incredibly hot for canola oil especially. So I know the pan's nice and hot, it's ready to fry. And then when I pour it in, just be careful, it's gonna splatter. It's obviously a lot of liquid hitting hot oil. That's what it does, it splatters. So stir right away and don't stop stirring almost the entire time. We're gonna cook this down. We are almost there. Yep, there goes the wisp of smoke. So it's gonna all go in at once. So it basically starts frying. I get that chili punch right up into my nostrils and it kind of makes me cough a little bit. My wife loves that when she comes in the room and I'm frying up chilies. But it's important. It's how you really coax out a lot of flavors. So even if you get yelled at, do it anyway. It's worth it. So you're gonna cook this down for a couple minutes till it gets to be the consistency you want. I'm gonna add a little bit of salt and a couple drops of vinegar, and that's about it. So this is where you really want to make sure that you're cooking to your taste, your seasoning preference, your chili heat preference, because this is the salsa that's gonna be going on your taco. So always taste, right? Don't just go through the motions. Taste so that you know what you're giving your guests and your friends and your loved ones. All right, it is time to throw together this tortilla dough. And again, if you have masa harina, actual masa, great, use it. It's a little bit harder to come by. Maseca is a masa harina. It's basically nixtamalized masa that's been dried into kind of a corn flour. So we're basically just rehydrating it. And it's super simple. I'm literally following the recipe that's on the bag, which is 2 cups masa harina with 1.5 cups water. So my 2 cups leveled off. And then 1.5 cups water. And this is a good starting point. The more you make this dough and the more you use it, you get a feel for it. It wants to be a pretty hydrated dough. You don't want your tortillas to be dry, right? So it's just gonna take some practice, and I'll give you a couple hints, but I mean, it's as simple as adding these 2 ingredients together, stirring, and bring it together as a dough. And so for those of you that don't know what masa is nixtamalized corn. So there's field corn, like dry corn, and then there's sweet corn. So this is actually the dry version. And it gets nixtamalized, which is basically a process where it gets soaked in an alkaline solution. Usually it's lye, but it's a really basic alkaline solution. And what that does is it breaks down the outer dry husk, and it makes the interior kind of endosperm of the corn edible. And so once we've taken the husk and removed it, you can mill that, and that milling process, what's left at the end of that is masa. So that's one of the most important ingredients to Mexican cuisine, and honestly human culture in general. And they've been making it for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So really kind of cool process. I suggest you try it at least once to make it yourself. So you can see it's already kind of becoming a dough. And all you have to do at this point is roll this into a little ball. And then we use a tortilla press, and I'll show you how to use that. And this gets flattened into your corn tortillas. Really fun, really delicious. Highly suggest you do it. All right, now my chilies have been hydrating for 25 minutes, and they're nice and pliable. I'm just taking off the stems, getting some of the seeds. I don't need all the seeds to be out. I personally like a little bit of heat left in my chilies. And we're combining it with all the ground spices that we did earlier, apple cider vinegar, the roasted garlic that I peeled out of the husk. And then we're just gonna move this to the blender base and just puree this, process this until it's a paste. Now, it's a little bit thicker than I like it. Depends on what you're using it for. You can always just use a little bit of your cooking water, your soaking water, or a little bit of regular water just to thin it out. So in this case, I'm just gonna grab a little bit of this soaking liquid, add it to it, and process it till it's a little bit thinner. So this is our adobo marinade. This can last for probably weeks at refrigerated temperature, or you can freeze it, which I like to do. I'll just freeze it into smaller usable containers, and then pull it out and thaw it when I'm ready to make something like this again. That way, it just like, you go through all this effort to make this, but now you got it ready to go the next 3, 4, 5 times you want to use it. So really, it is worth it. Just find the time, sit back, enjoy the process. So I painted this adobo all over this pork. My suggestion, minimum 30 minutes, up to 4 hours, 8 hours overnight if you really wanted it to. There's a little bit of vinegar, so it would start to kind of break it down a little bit. So my suggestion, best case, 2 hours. Let it marinate, and we'll cook it from there. All right, so we're gonna shape some tortillas. This is probably the trickiest part. You just wanna grab a nice pinch. You can scoop these out if you have a scooper, or you can just eyeball it. Roll it in your palms. And a little test I like to do to see if it's hydrated enough is I'll just kind of lightly press it in my palm. And if you can see, there's a little crack there, but other than that, it's pretty smooth around here. If it was underhydrated and too dry of a dough, you would see a lot of cracking, and that would yield, a dry, crumbly tortilla. So I feel like this is pretty good. Got some plastic wrap laid out on both sides of my tortilla press. And then I'm gonna put it down on the side closest to the handle. Push this over. And then apply, firm but even pressure. Nothing, not crazy hard, but nice and firm. And there you go. So hopefully it comes out. We'll see. This is the trickiest part, right? This is where, you know, years and years and years of doing and practice come in handy. But I got one cast iron pan here over pretty high heat, and then another one over kind of medium heat. I'm gonna gently peel this plastic wrap off, if I can find a corner of it. There we go. I'm gonna take it in my right hand, peel it off, and then do this little backhanded flip. There we go. That worked out pretty well. First take. So we're gonna cook it 15, 20 seconds on one side, flip it, cook it another 20, 30 seconds, and then I'll move it over here. And then I have it in my little tortilla basket. I have a lightly dampened towel. You could use plastic wrap or aluminum foil, but something to keep the heat, because what happens is when these cool down, they lose all their elasticity. And if that happens, even reheating won't make them as tender as they were before. That's why a lot of people think corn tortillas are dry. Well, they kind of are, because we've reheated them and they were never eaten, and they were like super fresh form. Which is why I think if you take the time to do this yourself, I think you'll surprise yourself at how amazing, especially if you're a flour tortilla like purist through and through. They don't really do a lot of flour tortillas in Mexico. They do a lot of corn, and there's a reason. It's delicious, it's abundant, and it's authentic. So that's why I highly suggest it. Now you'll see, sometimes every now and then you can get these to puff. When you have the magic, the perfect temperature of your pan, the perfect thickness of your tortilla, the perfect hydration, these will actually puff like pita, and it's amazing to see. Yeah, don't be upset if yours don't. Mine's kind of puffing, but you know, just the tiniest bit. So practice, practice, practice. All right, last thing is to cook this pork. So this has been rubbed with the adobo, and then I added a little bit of salt on the outside of it. My original intention was to grill this, but as you can see, it's snowing pretty crazy outside, so I'm not gonna be grilling that. So we're gonna use our home broiler, and it's a pretty simple thing. I don't know how many people actually use the broiler, but it's basically just top heat, right? So instead of the bottom being hot, the top is hot. So I moved the oven racks to the very top position. I have this pork on a rack as well to elevate it up. And we're just going right there on the top rack. And we're just gonna let that thing cook and basically charbroil on both sides. I'll pull it out, I'll flip it, I'll put it back in, I'll get it nice and colored on both sides. Looking for an internal temperature somewhere in the neighborhood of like 130. It'll probably rest up to 135, 138. Which would be just around medium, which is great for pork, especially for these tacos. So yeah, I'm just gonna shut the door and let that go. All right, last thing to do is slice this pork and get some of these tacos assembled. So I've let it rest for about 5 or 6 minutes after its time in the oven, and here we go. So I like to cut it as thin as I can. It helps keep it nice and tender, especially for tacos. All right, my plate. A couple of my freshly made tortillas. Pork on, white onion, finely diced, some cilantro, fresh pineapple, and then lastly, our salsa rojo. All right, there we go. Enjoy, guys. I hope you try this at home. It's delicious. Thank you.